They thought she was a shadow in a gray polo, a thin girl with a mop and a badge that squeaked against the floor. They did not see the city inside her hands, but one pair of eyes would, and what happened after would rattle the room where people pretended to have seen everything. At night, the gallery on Michigan Avenue smelled like lemon cleaner and old varnish. Fluorescence hummed above the marble, a sterile chill that sank through the soles of Ivy Williams's sneakers. She wiped a rectangle of scuff marks no one would notice. A scissor lift blinked its little orange light. Somewhere in the back, a cooler sighed as it struggled to keep the rosé at that perfunctory expensive cold. Her badge, plastic, cracked, scuffed with her initials in Sharpie, thumped against her chest each time she leaned in. She could feel it, permanent as a heartbeat, the reminder, janitorial temp. She was 16 and tired, but the tired had an ember in it. She thought in color. While she pushed the mop, she rearranged the night, how sodium street lamps broke thin over alley puddles like heated glass, how the L's steel chatter scraped the stars, how the city kept taking and gave back only in sideways glances. People called her Hawn and Sweetheart, and never her name. "Don't forget the corners," a voice said earlier that week, not unkind, just practiced in the diplomacy of invisibility. "We have collectors coming." "We," she'd repeated in her head, smiling without teeth. "We did not include girls who wore rubber gloves. We meant the ones with jackets that whispered when they walked, the ones whose laughter made ice clink." Tonight, her aunt's words rode beside her like a second breath. "If there's a slim chance, show the painting." The canvas, wrapped in a thrifted bedsheet, hid behind a thick burgundy curtain in the storage corridor where the walls smelled of dust and labels, where a radiant fan of light cut the dark into slices. Ivy had slid it there an hour earlier, heart beating against the taped edges, hands stung from stretching the cheap linen over a cobbled frame. She'd painted the city from memory at the kitchen table, the blue bite of pre-dawn, the throb of taillights, a man on the corner selling knockoff earbuds under a hand-painted sign. A thin rail of sun snuck behind the skyscrapers like a sly deal. She'd scraped with a spoon to make light fracture. She'd used a toothbrush to spatter rain. She had almost convinced herself, leave it there, finish mopping, say nothing. But chance wore a coat that could catch on anything. "Hey!" The word cut the air like a chill. She looked up. Thomas Grayson stood with the posture of ownership, silver hair, tailored navy wool, that expensive scent smell, smoked cedar, something clean and cold, the gallery's owner. She had seen him in newspapers, occasionally in person, always in rectangles of light. His shoes made no sound. "You're in the way," he said, polite as a knife. "And keep your eyes off the walls. We have protocols." "I'm looking at the floor," she answered softly, surprised to hear her voice. Her fingers closed around the mop handle. The plastic was slick and warm under her palm. He followed her gaze and landed on the curtain, where a sliver of canvas peeked out like a held breath. "What's that?" he asked, not curious, suspicious. "Nothing," she lied, and she knew he heard the tremor. Another voice floated by, thin, metallic, amused, phone held half raised. "Is the help curating now?" A young woman in sequins, filming for someone who wasn't here. A man in a camel coat snorted, "Leave the art to people who can spell Providence, sweetheart." Laughter drained the warmth from the hall. Someone said, "Let's keep the atmosphere." Someone else, sotto voce, "A mop among Monets." He looked at Ivy as if the air near her had become stale. "This is not a trial run of your hobbies," he said. "And workers don't loiter backstage." He gestured, and security, two men with bored eyes and crisp sleeves, materialized like they'd been practicing too long for an easy show. Phones were out. A quick tilt upward, a private grin. One recorded her badge. "Please," Ivy started, then stopped. Pride branched through her throat like something with thorns. She made herself stand still as they guided her toward the door, the world turning glossy and narrow. Her mop clacked against the threshold. The air outside hit like a lake in April, brittle, dark, wakeful. Behind her, inside, someone spilled cranberry cocktail. She turned by reflex. A glass rolled, the deep garnet stain bleeding toward the baseboard. An elderly woman reached and flinched at the cold. "Let me," Ivy said. She crouched, hands moving quick, cheap paper napkins rasping, the sticky sweet tang of cranberry rising. Her fingers came away red. The woman patted her hand. "Thank you." No one else noticed. Doors clicked back into place. The mop water, inside, would film over with dust. Ivy stood on the sidewalk with her badge between her fingers until the cold lifted her eyes. Michigan Avenue was a river of taillights and mashed snow, tourists with bags swinging, the scent of roasted nuts that always smelled like December. She kept walking because she still had the broom closet keys and would need to return them or hear about it for a week. She still had the painting behind the curtain. She still had a heartbeat. She swallowed the burn in her chest like it was a pill you take because there's no other medicine. Morning came with coffee that tasted like burnt pennies and fluorescent light so white it stripped everything of mercy. Someone had moved the painting. It leaned against a crate at an angle you'd never choose if you valued corners. Breath fogged in the loading bay, a draft brought in the smell of wet cardboard and snow. Ivy's stomach flipped. She had been foolish. She moved toward it, the bedsheet slipping, when a voice intersected hers. This voice wasn't practiced in not seeing. It had that cross-country flight fatigue, the scrape of sleep, and the quickness of someone who spots what other people miss. A man with a shaved head and a scarf that looked like it had a story paused in the doorway. He was flipping through a program, bored, when the bright fox of color in the corner snared him. "Hold on," he said, half to the air. He bent. His hand hovered above the signature as if touching would break something sacred. "Whose eye? Williams?" "Inventory doesn't list it," said the assistant curator, already exasperated, already typing with perfect nails. She didn't look at Ivy as she came in with her keys and her breath and her guilt. She looked at the man. She'd recognized him now. He'd bought a Basquiat at Christie's last year and made a point of wearing gym sneakers to the sale. New York money. He had rested the sneakers on a herringbone plank. "Show me this," he said. The room paused, oxygen thinning. Thomas had arrived without footsteps. He examined the signature with an eyebrow. "An intern's prank?" "It needs a wall," the collector said. "Now, put it on the small stage. Tell me the story." "The story," Thomas said slowly, because he loved stories people would pay for, "is that an unknown has appeared." He looked at Ivy then, like she was a misplaced burr, caught on the cuff of the day. Then he looked at the signature again, and something moved under his face like a tide. First Williams. A name in the back of his father's desk drawer, in a stack of old letters you only keep if you feel the edges of your life as if it might once again catch fire. A man who had carried someone else's frames out of a burning building and died with paint in his lungs. A family who had lost their cornerstone. Thomas felt the air change, and ridiculously smelled smoke. He could see his father's cigarette going cold in a silver dish, the window open a crack, their house small in a way his life never was again. Williams. The child left behind. A girl? His father had written a check that felt to him like a raft. He had wanted to believe that mattered. He looked at Ivy and saw her badge. The room thickened with competing scents, coffee from the caterer's urn, industrial cleaner, the metallic tang of the heater's first cough. He did not apologize. His mouth, so practiced in offers, didn't know the weight of that word in this configuration. He gestured instead, the hand of a man who knows walls as instruments, and within an hour a spotlight cooled over Ivy's painting. In that light, the city Ivy carried unfolded itself and filled the room. Someone whispered, "Is that rain or light?" Someone else filmed, but the video faltered because the camera would never catch the way the scraped paint seemed to exhale. "Get it into the afternoon auction," the collector said. "I can bring 2 people across the street who will make this a fight." He smiled in a way that had nothing to do with pity. It had the excitement of discovery. His watch flashed when he lifted his wrist. He checked the time. "Doors at noon? It's 10. You have 2 hours." 2 hours. The words clicked like a timer in Ivy's ribs. She stood outside that moment, watching herself. Part of her wanted to run, scoop the painting back into the sheet and go somewhere no one laughed. Another part, the ember, fanned. There was a conversation then, brief but gravitational. It happened in a cold stairwell where the paint peeled in coins and footsteps echoed. Thomas faced her, the spotlight version of himself dimming a notch. He held a manila folder like a shield. "Who taught you?" he asked softly. "You have no—" He stopped himself. "Who taught you to pull light like that?" "A bus window," she said, and to her horror, the truth made it easier not to cry. "And YouTube, and practice, and my aunt. She used to work here. She told me art isn't a room, it's a door if you push." She swallowed. "My grandfather painted. He died when there was a fire." She felt the familiar ice slide behind her eyes. She did not say how the fire had eaten up all the words her mother had about the man. She did not say the walk-in clinic smell of antiseptic that perfumed their house for months. I promised I would learn, so no one could tell me I wasn't enough of anything to try. The sentence left her mouth differently than it had lived in her head. It sounded like a vow said over a candle. Thomas's throat moved. The hallway hummed with the furnace and the distant clink of glass. He saw his father's neat script on the letter again, the way it ended, as if tired of saying sorry, but still saying it. In his mind, his father's voice warned him, don't mistake a check for penance. He had done that all his life, turned money into absolution. He met Ivy's eyes and felt something rearrange. Help me, he said. It surprised them both. We'll need to relabel the wall, adjust the lot list. It will be a moment. Do you have a title? She thought of traffic lights that winked even when no one was there. After rain, she said. The words tasted like pennies and peppermint. He nodded. I'll need to place you away from the chaos, he added, then forced courage into his next sentence. And I owe you an apology. It came out stiff, ashamed of itself. She noticed his left thumbnail was chewed, a human detail that loosened the spiral in her chest. She didn't forgive him. Not yet. But she heard the hinge creak. At 11:58, the gallery switched from fridge light to theater. The spot on After Rain warmed slightly, picking up the blues until they swam. Voices rose with Money's particular electricity. The smell of perfume and wool pressed against the air. Someone's cufflink flashed. Someone else said, "Who?" And someone else made a face that meant, "Watch." Unknown Chicago, the auctioneer said, precise as a metronome. His gavel lay like a small animal at rest. Estimating conservatively. Shall we begin at 20? Laughter like wind chimes, condescension disguised as charm. Ivy felt heat prickle the back of her neck. Her badge hung like a confession. She wanted to hide behind a column. The collector in the scarf lifted a finger. 20, the clerk said. 25, someone across the aisle. Sneakers tapped against wood. The numbers stepped upward, then jogged, then ran. 50, 80, 100. The laughter recalibrated to interest. Thomas stood at the edge of the stage, the blood trains in his temples loud. He had never feared a number. Now he feared a moment. Would this expose everything? His blind spot, his too late seeing, his inherited obligation. The numbers became a kind of wind. The room leaned into it. 300. A ripple of disbelief, then hunger. 500, the woman in the camel coat said, but her mouth made the shape of sorry. Ivy's hands shook in her sleeves. Her aunt, watching from the doorway in a thrifted blazer, squeezed the strap of her purse so hard the vinyl sighed. 2 million, a voice said with impatience, and a little down feather of silence drifted over the crowd. The auctioneer didn't blink. 2.5, the scarf. 3. 3.5. 4. 4.7. 4.9. That elastic hush again, stretching tight. A beat and then the scarf, almost bored. 5. It dropped into the room like a coin into deep water. Some laughter broke, high and brittle, quickly swallowed. The gavel came down in a wooden snap. Ivy flinched at the sound, even as her skin seemed to open to the light. There was clapping. Polite first, then bigger as if people recognized a scene they wanted in their stories. Phones were up again. Someone tried to catch her face. Her aunt stepped in. "Excuse us," she said in her warm, iron voice. Thomas's eyes had water in them he would later call fatigue. He looked for Ivy and could not find her until he looked lower, on a bench along the back wall where the shadows pooled. She stared at her hands like they could turn into flight. He found her in the park a week later, where the afternoon light was the color of tea and the wind smelled like lake and hot pretzel carts. She sat on a cold bench sketching a woman who threw bread to bold pigeons. The pencil scratched in a rhythm that soothed and pushed. The city moved in slow planes around her, strollers, earbuds, a jogger in a neon band, horns that sounded distant. "Miss Williams," Thomas said, stopping a respectful distance away. He held a slim leather folder that creaked. He had rehearsed a speech in a varnished office where apologies sounded like checks. He threw the speech away on the walk over. He began with the thing that mattered. "I was wrong." She let the pencil rest. The pigeon's wings slapped the air. "Yes," she said. The word wasn't cruel. It sat between them like honesty. He opened the folder. The paper whispered, "A contract," advance, schedule, dates. A scholarship letter on thick stock. The School of the Art Institute would like. The words made the air feel thin. I should have seen you, he said, before money made the room notice. He swallowed. My father, he knew your family. He owed your grandfather more than he could pay. I owe. He didn't finish. Debt tasted different when it was human. He put the folder on the bench, not on her lap, and stepped back. The sun found the edges of his hair and made a halo of a man who had never thought he'd need one. She thought of the cranberry stain, the phones, the laugh. She thought of her aunt tapping the bus window when they passed the gallery, telling stories only old photographs remember. Her anger was a living thing, but it was tired of pacing. It wanted more room. She ran her thumb over the metal curve of her badge in her pocket, scuffed, warm from her body heat, and found a place in herself that wanted to try. Okay, she said, but we do it my way. He nodded like he'd expected nothing less. We'll do it in the small gallery with the skylight, she said, and already saw light like a sheet washing a floor. And I bring names with me, people who clean and cook and carry. They get a wall. Done, he answered quickly. He could feel a program forming like an itch he'd been waiting to scratch. Something with a name, something that would teach a room to look. The rumors began like oil on water, sheen, spread, iridescent if you tilted your head. Fast-tracked for optics, came one. Quota queen, another, said with that smile that showed all the teeth and no warmth. Her email lost invitations that had supposedly been sent. A brand manager shook her hand with 2 fingers and wiped the other on his slacks like paint had a contagion. A curator introduced her by saying, "Our brave new voice," brave like a category, new like an expiration date. She watched the words come at her and then go around when they saw she'd stopped devoting breath to blocking. She answered with work. At night, she painted until the radiator clicked into sleep and the air smelled like linseed and her own clean sweat. In the morning, she came to the gallery because a surprise had come with success, responsibility, a long word that felt like a door that didn't open unless you pushed. They gave her a task she wasn't supposed to be able to do. The lighting system, the expensive temperamental grid on which the gallery's illusions hung, had failed a test minutes before city inspectors' visit. The place smelled like ozone and panic. Deadlines clicked in her head like knuckles. 2 hours, again. The technician rolled his eyes at her presence in the control room and made a joke just loud enough. Hope your magic mop handles DMX. She bent over the schematic. The paper rasped under her hands. She remembered the L's undercarriage, the way the city's veins humming above your head teach you about power and the patience of systems. She listened, not with ears, with the part of her that learned to paint noise. She saw where the signal looped and lost itself. She ran a cable under the grid with a gymnast's focus and a janitor's balance, palms collecting dust like powder. She rewrote a string of numbers. She didn't apologize to the technician when the line went green. The inspector, a woman with boots you don't mess with, signed and left. The technician tugged his cap and tried a smile he hadn't practiced much. Didn't know it could be done like that, he said, which, coming from him, was a hymn. Results, not labels, Thomas murmured later when she worried. Again, she had no diploma to put beside her work. He caught himself quoting her to her and grinned like he knew the theft and loved it. She started to forget to be small, not always, but enough. Her show opened under the skylight. The room smelled like clean cotton and warm dust, like a summer attic where you find boxes labeled with someone else's life. For one piece, she suspended old work badges from the ceiling with monofilament so they hovered at eye level. Plastic rectangles from cleaning crews, cafeteria staff, security. Names stamped in sans serif, clear as truth. People walked through them like a forest and flinched when the badges clinked. Her own badge hung in the corner of the piece like a parenthesis. She stood nearby and watched strangers read names out loud. A caterer wiped her eye and said, "Damn." A finance guy held his tie, suddenly careful around the past. The city talked. It used some of the bad words, but not all. At first, they attached her to the novelty. Then, they could not. They ran out of small words. The program came next. Thomas, feeling like he'd arrived late but ready to stay, launched See the Unseen. Scholarships, mentorship, open studio nights where cleaning staff and docents could bring whatever they made in secret and pin it up. A beatboxer in maintenance stunned a room until the walls hummed. A night security guard who wrote villanelles read one about the moon stamped in a time card. They put coffee in real mugs and didn't count. Ivy ran the first session. She wrote her phone number on the board and said, "Come find me if they make you wait outside." Her voice shook for the first 2 minutes and then stacked bricks. She watched shy people lift things out of the corners of their lives and set them in the light. She learned names. She said them out loud. The night of her big talk, the gallery's main room turned into a kind of soft auditorium. The seats borrowed from a minimalist furniture show, linen gray, good for posture. The stage smelled faintly of paint and the lemon cleaner that always sneaked back in. Thomas sat in the second row where he could see faces turn. The collector with the scarf leaned near a pillar like a benevolent satellite who could leave if he wanted but didn't. The woman in sequins sat tight-mouthed, her phone face down for once, the camera eye blind. Ivy walked to the center and let the silence settle on her shoulders. Her palms were dry. Her badge was not on her chest. It waited in her pocket, warm like trust. "I started here at night," she said. "I pushed a mop across a floor that wasn't interested in remembering me." A murmur, recognition, discomfort. She looked at faces and thought, "You brought your own mirrors." People laughed. I worked. People doubted. I learned. When they told me to leave, I left and came back with a painting. Today I'm here to say, we won't be quiet when the door closes in our faces. The words were not explosive. They were iron. She let a second pass between each so they could cool, then land. "I will hold it open, and if I'm not there, someone I taught will be. Talent doesn't need your permission to exist." The applause started like popcorn and turned into a gale. People stood. A camera crew from a station with a peppy morning anchor blinked their red light. Someone in back sobbed once, a clean sound. Then came the fall, not orchestrated, but inevitable. The assistant curator, the one who had never looked at Ivy when she moved through the room, had faked invoices and layered favoritism over oversight until the pile collapsed. The proof spread like water under the front door. You didn't need to be inside to get your socks wet. Emails surfaced. So did a video. The curator laughing into her phone at the party, making a crass joke about quota art while a cranberry stain spread near her heel. The board moved quick because money respects velocity. In the same room where she had tilted her chin at Ivy like a little queen, she made a statement to the press. Her voice broke in a place where voices don't break on purpose. "I'm sorry," she said. The microphones were too close. They magnified breath. Ivy stood at the side with Thomas and thought, "I do not need this apology. It belongs to the mirror." She nodded once when the woman's eyes skidded toward her. Not mercy exactly, not punishment, just an end. A week later, a new plaque glowed outside the skylight room. The letters sat proud and smooth in brushed steel. The Williams Room. People took pictures, ran their fingers over her last name, posted captions they'd actually thought about. Under the plaque, in a glass cube that made even plastic look like relic, rested her first badge. The crack caught the light. People crowded around, pointed at their own handheld rectangles, and said things they'd been waiting to say. A security guard's daughter lifted her onto her hip so she could see. The little girl touched the glass with a fingertip. "Who is that?" she asked. "Someone like us," her mother answered. "Someone they see now." Summer made the city smell like hot coins and barbecue smoke. It rained every afternoon like a habit you're trying to kick. Ivy worked, taught, made mistakes, learned. Some nights she went back to the park bench where Thomas had found her and drew nobody in particular, just light, like she always had. Some afternoons she slipped into the Williams Room when no one was there and stood with the badge under glass. In the case, it looked almost proud. She smiled at that. She remembered the weight of it pulling at her shirt, the way it knocked the mop handle when she walked too fast. That sound had sounded like apology. Here, it sounded like a metronome. On a fall evening, the room had emptied of tourists and the lemon cleaner smell had loosened. The HVAC hummed like a large, content animal. Out the window, Michigan Avenue's lights came on one by one, yellow squares stacking in the dark. Ivy stood alone in the doorway, felt the cool, polished concrete under her soles, and held the badge in her hand, out of its case because the glass had been lifted for cleaning. The plastic was cool and familiar, the crack a small canyon under her thumb. It had traveled from her chest to the cube and back like a journey a story makes before it belongs to the world. "Let them find you sooner," she whispered, and the room held the words hard, then let them fall into the soft places. She did not mean herself. She meant the boy in the elevator who made beats on the railing with his knuckles and stopped when the doors slid open. She meant the woman in the cafeteria who decorated cakes for cousins at a folding table at night. She meant whoever would stand next where she stood now and see their reflection in the glass and understand that reflection was permitted. Outside, a bus sighed at the curb. Inside, the skylight let one last band of late sun reach across the floor like a quiet hand. It made the steel letters shine. The city kept making its old noises, tires, voices, horns. Her phone buzzed. Her aunt. "You eat?" She typed back a picture of the badge in her palm and the plaque behind it and the place inside her that had room now. The city looked back at her through the glass. She smiled, then put the badge back in the cube and closed the lid carefully, like the end of a prayer. Remember this: talent does not ask what clothes you wear, what shade your skin is, or whom the world has told you to be. Remember this story so that one day you don't walk past someone the light hasn't found yet.